Hi, everybody. It is on the hour, so I'm going to go ahead and I've started our recording so that we have a record of everything that we're talking about today. And I'm excited to be joined today by Julie Gibson from SJ Consulting. So she's going to give us a bit of background about her. And just to let you know, I hope that my voice holds out. I have been a little bit sick this week. So if I suddenly pause and have to get a drink, I apologize in advance. But Julie and Kimberly will help cover for that, and all will be well. So just to kind of give you a brief idea of how this is going to work. We're going to start with a bit of a conversation of Julie and I and where we've been with working with doing a conversion of non-constituent relationship records into constituents, talking about why some organizations do choose to do that. And then I want to show you some things that we can work within a Wortacular. So we're going to look at a few of the considerations that you may want to take into account as you make that decision, ways that you want to think about that data before you put it into Razor's Edge. So just going to do a quick check. Julie, I think that we have you there. So if you want to go ahead and chime in, haven't heard you yet. So go ahead and I think you might need to unmute yourself because you're unlocked, and then you can join the conversation. So while Julie's doing that, just to give you a brief introduction of who I am. So my name is Christine. I'm with Zeidman. I have been with Zeidman Development now for about 18 months. Prior to working for Zeidman, I was a Razor's Edge consultant for 5 years. And prior to that, I was in the trenches as a database manager for a variety of different organizations, mostly in Razor's Edge, but a little bit in other databases. As part of that history, one of my jobs was managing the database for a system of K-12 schools. And with that system, we were working with a non-Blackbaud product to track our students and parents. And one of the challenges that I had at the time was getting the student and parent data into Razor's Edge every year. So that was before Importacular existed, before I knew about Importacular, and I was using Razor's Edge import for that process. So I was creating lots of duplicates every year, even though I was using VLOOKUP and trying to match families and constituents, definitely was running into a lot of challenges along the way. In getting that data correct and spending a lot of time cleaning up the data as we went. So I did use a different tool that no longer exists in order to make all parents constituents, because it did help with that mapping and it helped with importing that data. So my background in this is that I have done this a different way that was a lot harder. But once I got all of the parents from non-constituents into constituents, it definitely helped me manage those relationships with the families. So a lot of the reasoning that I have in my mind for why organizations would want to do this is based on working with that student and family situation. So Julie, I'm going to go ahead and see if maybe you can chime in now and tell us a little bit about yourself and your background, and then also a little bit of why you've had clients go ahead and want to do this.
Christine, sorry, just having a slight problem with Julie's audio. So bear with me while I work on that, and I'll get back to you shortly.
Okay, great. Thank you. Sorry, everybody. So I guess just while we're waiting for that, I've kind of given a little bit about why I wanted to go ahead and do that upgrade. I know that there are some other situations where people do this outside of the school specter. I do see that Howard is saying still muted. Howard, are you hearing me or are you just not hearing Julie? I just want to make sure we got that. Okay, good. Thank you. Just wanted to make sure I was clear on what was going on. So I know that there are other areas that people may want to do this if you have had alumni in addition to maybe spouses. So I do see other ways where having all of your people that you're working with as constituents can be helpful. And just to be fair, I also understand the concerns that people have with if you make everyone constituents, it does increase your Razor's Edge records. So one of the things I do want to show you when we get to the piece with in particular is that we do have the option to query. So you don't have to make everyone a constituent. Julia, I think we've got you. So thank you for letting me stall a bit there. Why don't you introduce yourself to everybody and give us your background of how you've seen this, what your clients have needed, a little bit of that history.
Absolutely, and I apologize for the delay there. There was a little bit of an issue on the pod. On the pod. Hi, everyone. This is Julie Gibson. I'm president of SJ Consulting. I've been working in the nonprofit world since 2003. Worked with a little north of 4,000 nonprofits over the years. And so we've seen a lot, done a lot, and we're very excited about our partnership with everybody on the call today and talking about the reasons that we see frequently why organizations may want to elevate those relationship records to full constituents. And so, some of the more commonly requested abilities there would be in the higher ed sector, if you have your alumni and a partner spousal record where the partner spouse becomes more involved with your organization, you want to elevate them, keep the relationship intact, but have them as a full constituent. We also see a lot of situations with K through 12, where historically the parent is the primary, children are on their records, or vice versa in some cases. But as those children become of age and become a donor or become involved as a volunteer, maybe even become an employee of the school, you want to elevate those relationships. Very frequently, we see where we can do a global constituent move of deceased spouses. So, not the deceased spouse, excuse me, the widowed spouse when their partners have become deceased. And so instead of having to do a one-off, it's gathering all of those records. And in particular, if you're using Deceased Finder or some other tools that are available through Razor's Edge and NXT to just identify who is deceased, then making that widowed record the primary and keeping the relationship intact, of course. And then, of course, working through some of the gift and attribute and action and different elements on those records that Christine is going to go over. So those are just a few of the ones. Org relationships are another one where constituents will have org relationships on their record, but the organization may become a sponsor of one of your events. And so you'd like to elevate those org records to full constituents and again, retaining the relationships. So those are a few. And as we get started in the conversation, we might be able to uncover and discuss some other ones that have been popping into your minds lately as well. And I see some of our clients, so very nice to see some names I recognize on here as well.
Absolutely. So yes, I don't believe I mentioned it in my intro, but I did type it into the box. We do have the chat box moderated. So my colleague Kimberly is there. She's going to be reading over your questions and she'll respond to you now. But if it's something that she thinks is helpful for everyone, she'll definitely bring that up later at the end. So a couple of the considerations that I wanted to mention as you're thinking about whether or not this is a good idea for you are things like reporting and head of household, solicitation, and hard credit and soft credit. And the reason that we wanted to mention our considerations before we even look at Importacular is partly because how you put this information into Razor's Edge really depends on how you consider all of those things on the front end. So if you've ever seen me posting on Facebook or LinkedIn, you know that most of the time I answer people's questions with, what do you want the end result to be? What do you want your reporting to be? Because that drives everything. And I know I'm not the only one who starts with that question. I just know I do it a lot. So Julie, one of the things I think you have a great handle on for that is thinking about that solicitation. So what are some things that you would recommend people do as they build this idea out to make sure that they're not soliciting both spouses?
No, that's a great question. So obviously we can do some cross-referencing with the addresses and emails as well. So depending on if you're doing hard mail or email solicitations, you can absolutely do some deduping exercises across both address and email fields. And depending on your systems as well, if you have Razor's Edge email platforms, there are many, Blackbaud email platforms, some of which have baked in deduping so that you're not emailing both relationships that have been promoted to that full constituent status. On a mail issue, to your point, head of household, ensuring that that any records that you're promoting to that full constituent, that you have thought through the rules, the business rules, to say which of the two records becomes head of household and marking that record accordingly. That's incredibly important as you move forward with these types of exercises in your database.
Absolutely. So, and I think that just falls into reporting, and then hard and soft credit too, building out those rules and making that plan. So, do you have any other considerations that you would bring up at this point before I open the database?
No, I think as we go along, I might chime in if that's okay, as I see things that you're doing. Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay. Well, I'm going to go ahead and pull up my screen. And of course, it has to think about it. Every time you...
You know what I've been noticing is that in the last couple of days, all of these screen share platforms have had a few little bugs here and there with the timeliness. So I'm not sure if it's just extreme weather across the country or what's happening, but we have seen a lot of that.
Okay, can you see my my Razor's Edge? Well, I've got to log back in, but can you see my desktop now? Oh, perfect. Okay. So where I'm starting today with is actually a query, which I'm sure everyone on this call today has spent more than enough time in query. But that's where this whole process would start, using this with in particular. So I actually opted today for a relationship query. You could do this with a constituent query as well. I opted for a relationship query just because I really wanted to narrow down to the specific relationships rather than seeing all of a constituent's relationships. Again, both options will work because the end result, what we need from this is that CSV, that Excel file. So you can go either way. That's just the method to my madness. And I also decided to keep this one pretty simple. I have a sample database, so this is not going to pull a lot of data. But I say that to say you can tailor this to who you want to promote. So for example, if you wanted to work with Julie's situation of we have deceased constituents and we want their widowed spouses to now become constituents, we could build our query based around that and just upgrade those spouses. This is not a one and done. You have to upgrade everyone. This is you can upgrade the people you specifically need to upgrade. So the filters aren't really the relevant piece here. The output, though, is going to be more relevant because this is the data that we're actually going to work with when we're in Importacular. So I did keep it pretty simple again here. I've added my constituent ID because I'm pulling this data directly out of Razor's Edge. I might as well match it using that exact matching tool of a constituent ID. I have pulled out the constituent's first and last name. Same thing, I do need that as a marker in my template just to know who the people are. But then you can also see I've added the individual relationship first name and last name. And then I went ahead and I added the constituent's preferred address. I did that because I wanted to show you how we can add the constituent's address to the spouse that we're creating. I could also add any number of things that we want to copy over to this spouse. So say we want to copy the constituent code from the existing spouse to the non-constituent that we're upgrading. We could add that. We could add attributes. We could add notes, pretty much anything that you want to. If it's available in your query output, we can work with that. Now, you may be limited if you don't have those areas within Importacular. It's a different conversation, but you have everything available to you here. And then if just so you can kind of see a little bit here, I do have my data sorted here so you can see a little bit of what I have. So let's go ahead and close our query. I have already exported that data so we can work with it. And I've already started our template just because I didn't really want to, spend the whole time we were together today building a template. So I'm going to open up Importacular and walk you through a little bit of how I've set this up so that we can do that upgrade. So we're going to work with our file. So select our data source, click on File. And then we're just going to find where we've saved that on our computer. So I've saved it as a non-constituent CSV here. And then I will retrieve my data. And then at this point, if you don't have a template, you build a new one, but I do have one already created. So I'm going to go ahead and select my existing template. So I want to show you what I have set up here. So I'm going to click on the edit button there so that we can do that. So some of you I know have built templates. Some of you have not. So I know that some of this may be review, some of this may be brand new. Anytime you start a template in Importacular, you always have to start with a constituent. So for the sake of what we're doing right now, I know we are converting that non-constituent into a constituent, but for the sake of this import, the constituent is still the person who was the original constituent in Razor's Edge. The reason for that is because the logic that we're working with is we're matching to the existing relationship, and we're going to upgrade that existing relationship into a new constituent. So our new constituent, quote unquote, is still going to be mapped to our individuals tab. So that's just so you understand when it says constituent here, that's who I'm referring to. Just to try and help keep it a little bit clear in the way that I named my mappings, I have tried to label the non-constituent as either spouse or non-constituent, just so I keep it a little bit straight for myself and for everybody else. So the first mapping that I built, like I said, was my constituent. And you can see here that this has a list of Razor's Edge fields. You can see which ones are required based off that green circle. And the source fields are going to be the output that I put into that CSV. So everything here is what I chose. And then I've gone ahead and I have mapped the output to the Razor's Edge field in that source field. So let's go ahead and make sure we've got everything. We do have our first name. This is one where, because we have two different first names, you do want to make sure you get the correct first name with the correct record. So this is the one I want here. I do want the first name to be the main constituent. The relationship for the spouse is the one that says individual relationship. But you can see I did miss adding that ID. And we do want that ID because that's how we make sure that we have the correct person in Razor's Edge, since we didn't map everything else. If we were doing an import where there was a potential for changing names, or we were working with new data that we wanted to clean up, we might want to work with those settings on the far right. But because we're working with all information that's already in Razor's Edge, I'm not going to get into that today. And then the second to right column here, the default values, are things that may not be in our spreadsheet, but that we do want to put into Razor's Edge. So one thing you can see I did, because primary addressee and salutation are required in my database, I did have to fill in something. And so I just chose some standard formulas, but because I don't want to change Razor's Edge, I did uncheck the box there. So that is an example of how the field settings might still be helpful in this import. I'm going to go ahead and just cancel that. I have left a lot of these fields blank on this just because we really just want to match to a record that's already in Razor's Edge. So once I matched my constituent, the next step that I did was building that spouse mapping. So I did come to my individuals tab and I created the constituent relationship. So I matched here to the individual relationship first name. and the individual relationship last name just to make sure that I use the correct information. I did add a reciprocal and a relationship of spouse. I also chose the option to reciprocate the relationship. Obviously, those are going to be dependent upon what you actually want. And then the other thing is that because we are creating a constituent and we know that that is a requirement in our database to have that primary addressee and salutation, let's just go ahead and satisfy that requirement here. Go ahead and save that. If you soft credit gifts, we should probably check the box for spouse. You can always work with those as you need to for these relationships. I'm going to go ahead and save that. Once we have done this, because this is a constituent relationship, we do want to go ahead and double check our settings. So the default setting actually on the individual relationship is to convert an existing non-constituent into a constituent. And that's what we want right now, because the whole point of our import today is we want to convert these non-constituents into constituents. So I'm going to leave it on that. You do have a couple of other options here, but they're not going to meet our stated objective. So we don't want to add the new constituent relationship in addition to an existing, and we don't want to ignore the new constituent. We want to go ahead and convert. You can set a limit here about first names. So that's an option I do have checked. And if you are working with data where you have an alias that you need to map to, you can also do that. So one of the main times when people do that is if you're working with a third-party data source and you have ID numbers that you need to be able to look up spouses by, you can do that. I'm not sure that's relevant for this import, but just to explain what those settings do.
And if you don't mind, I'm just going to chime in real quickly because so many of the things that you're showing are so critical to ensuring the integrity of your data, obviously. And a lot of times, clients think that it's just checking a few boxes, but what you're going through and explaining as you're checking such sort of simple, if you think about it, simple boxes like the salutation and the addressee and the split or the soft credit box, those are actually really, really critical fields to ensure the integrity of your database. So thank you for walking through that.
Absolutely. And it really is important to think through your long term every time you make these choices. So then now that we have our spouse mapped here, I did go back and I added the address because I'm assuming we all know that not all of our non-constituents have an address, or they don't always have the right address. So I wanted to make sure that we put that preferred address from the constituent onto our non-constituent. So you can see here, I've mapped an address, and this address is linked to the spouse, not to the constituent. So in this upper right-hand corner, because we have two different constituents in our mapping, we have the main constituent, we also have the spouse. So I've chosen the spouse. And let me see if I can make this just a touch bigger here. So we have the option here. We've mapped our source field data. They're a new constituent, so it should be their preferred anyway, but I'm going to just check that box just to be sure. And same with the send mail. It should be, but sometimes we get our little weird things. So let's just make sure. But we have all of those options here. So I've set all of our fields from our output to now map to the address for this spouse. Couple things I do want to show you, because I know some people do work with address sharing, and because we're working with this individual relationship, we do have some area settings that let you work with your address sharing. So the first tab in your address area settings works with matching addresses, because we're making a new constituent, should not have really any reason to back up an address or anything like that. But the second address has a section here for your constituent relationships. So you have the option to just update the relationship address. One of the things I've always found a bit complicated to explain in Razor's Edge is the difference between the relationship address and the constituent address. That can be a bit cumbersome sometimes, but we could do that. We could just add or update the constituent address. We can leave it on the default, which is to update both. And then if you don't want the address to remain shared, you can check the box here and you can break the link. So you do have a few options depending on what you want to do with those address sharing, what you want to do with the relationship address versus the constituent address. Those are all available as part of this tool. So go ahead and I'll just save that as it is. And I just added that based off of just coming over here. I clicked address and then I gave it a name and then I chose who the address was linked to. So that's how you would do that. And then the other thing that I went ahead and added was I did add a constituent code to my spouse. So I wanted to work with the assumption that everyone in my database should have a constituent code. And I did that by clicking over here. I clicked on add constituent code. I named it so I'd remember whose constituent code it is. I did link it to the spouse, and then I just assigned a default value. Since we didn't add the constituent code to our output, it wasn't there, so we had to give it a default, and that's just the one that I happened to pick. Just something else that we could happen to do. So if part of your policy for how you want to make sure that you don't solicit these spouses, if you wanted to add a solicit code to them as you're converting them into constituents, you could add a code to them as you do the conversion. Make sure you pick the spouse. But you could do something here to say no communication, or if you have a head of household solicit code. That was something I ended up doing because when I converted my non-constituents into constituents at the K-12, was because my boss wanted to be able to know immediately which spouse was the head of household. So we did add a not head of household solicit code to all non-head of household spouses. It did take some work to keep it up to date, not necessarily saying you should or shouldn't do it, just saying I did do it, I did maintain it, it met her requirements, and it did help us prevent soliciting them. So that is an option here. You could add a solicit code if you wanted to. You can also add, let me go ahead and tell that no. We could add attributes, we could add notes. Any of these fields here now are available. We could add them to our template. Just going to go ahead and stop there because I feel like we have definitely covered a lot in the template and I want to kind of finish walking through the process. Julie, anything you'd want to comment on the template before we do that?
I do, just because I literally recently in the past month dealt with a client who was wanting to do something very similar. And the spousal partner records in their scenario, they did want to communicate with them over email, not through mail, to save money, obviously not mailing two letters to the same household, but through email. And the reason for that is because a lot of their spousal partner relationships that they were bringing into the full constituent mode had become donors, but they were only getting soft credited because of the primary record. And yet the spouse partner was the one saying, as purely as an example, I want to give to the primate, the monkey fund, versus my spouse is constantly giving to the big cats fund. And so they did want to communicate to both. So having those options that you were just showing means that in whichever scenario the folks on the call today and moving forward have, if the appeals do need to go out, at least through email, and you have unique email addresses for each of those records, not shared, then you can still appeal to them based on their interests with your organization, right? Or you could opt to have the check boxes that you were going through that would say, we're not going to communicate with the spousal record. We only want to have them as that full constituent for other purposes. So,
yeah, there's so much you can do with this. You're absolutely not limited. So it's just a matter of building out your system and figuring out what you need.
Absolutely.
So I'm gonna go ahead at this point and save and close. I do want to kind of show you just a little bit. I want to show a little bit of the next steps, and then I do want to leave some time at the end. I know we've got about 15 minutes. I definitely want to leave some time for questions and let you all ask anything, or let Kimberly chime in and ask anything that's been asked. So you have to select a control report. This is one of those do what I say and not what I just did. I definitely recommend that you do a new control report every single time you import. And I did just reuse a control report from before. So please just ignore that. And then I'm going to go ahead. I just want to show a couple other things that you can do with Importacular. One of them is you can choose to only process a certain number of rows. So when you do this the first time and you want to make sure that everything came through exactly how you wanted to, you can opt to just process the first row. You can opt to process the first 5 rows. That's a box you can choose however many you want. It's a great way to do some testing without having to create multiple files. You can also create a Razor's Edge query of everybody that you've created and updated. So great way to create a backup for yourself. And you can create a query of exceptions that's only going to work with updates, which all of our constituents are updates, just not our relationships. So those are just a couple options. I'm going to skip those for right now because we've only got 26 records, but just wanted to mention that because I think those are really helpful for people to be aware of. So we're going to go ahead and click continue here. And this is going to match our data back to what's in Razor's Edge. The matching is always happening based off of the criteria sets. Today, we're really going to be, like I said, it's very specific because we did use that constituent ID straight out of Razor's Edge, but that's where it gets that matching from. And you can see, like I said, everybody's going to be an update because we did pull them directly out of Razor's Edge. And just for those of you who may be a little bit newer to Importacular, just give you a brief idea of what this review screen does. We can see the constituent up here. We can see our data from our file. And you can also see down here what it's matching it to. So we've got this constituent, Elizabeth Ashton. She had an ID number of 2. And you can see down here, Razor's Edge, we have Elizabeth Ashton, ID number of 2. If we have any questions, we can always open her account directly here by just clicking on that orange RE. So just to kind of let you know that that's available there. And then we can also see all of our information. So you can see that we have our constituent code for our spouse. I know it shows the primary constituent here, but it is mapped to the spouse, not to that constituent. And same thing with the address. So we can review our data here and make sure it looks okay. And you can even make a quick correction. So I did notice we have this row down here where somebody got a little bit enthusiastic, shall we say, and they typed our information all in one box. And if I don't want that, I can actually go ahead and correct it in my data in the spreadsheet view here. Oops, got a little bit too now I may have to go back and add, I would have to go back and add the state later, but it's a lot better than what it was. At least I've got it in somewhat of the right order. You can't add to the code table fields, but you can with any field that's a text field. You can go in and make some corrections. So definitely a great option there. And then the last thing we can see is we do have our constituents here, and it is giving me a no match quality on my relationships. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to check my criteria sets on relationships and make sure that we have we must not have had that zip code. So let's go ahead and undo the zip code and let's make them, let's look for our spouses. So let's see if that changes that matching there a little bit.
And for anyone who on the call who's used to the old school admin import tool, just think about the ease of what you're doing right now on the fly and making changes like this without having to close everything, go back to your file, make changes or adjustments, go back to the import view. So I think that this is so easy.
Yeah,
there's to make edits as needed.
There's so much you can do there with that, and you can tweak it if it's not matching the way that you want to see it. We can work with that all as we go, and then we can validate before we actually import. So definitely a lot of options there. So I did want to leave the last 10 minutes for questions. So Kimberly, if just wanted to check in with you and see if we've got any questions before we run out of time for that.
Hiya. So the only question was whether or not the webinar would be available as a recording afterwards. So I let everyone know that we're absolutely going to do that. Perhaps we can send around an email follow-up to give everyone access to the presentation.
Yes, I will send everybody a recording of today's webinar so you can watch it. I will also, if if you already have access, I know some of you already have access to the individual relationship destination, and you just joined today to get some ideas of how to better use the tool you've invested in. So no need to send you pricing in that case. But for those of you who don't have access to this area, I will send you our current pricing just in case you haven't seen that yet this year, just so you know kind of what it's looking at. Purchasing the destination does include access to everything that we've seen here today. It also includes access to our email support desk if you don't already have that. We do offer onboarding. So if that's something you'd like to walk through with me. And also just because I know many of you are Julie's clients, if you purchase the destination with us and you want Julie to walk you through doing this, absolutely. We know that that's an option that you may want to go with as well. So don't want to take away from that. So if you have any other questions, go ahead and type them in now. And we can make sure we get to those. Just to kind of show you, I'm going to go ahead and validate just so you can see how that looks. And whoops, I've got a couple exceptions popping up here today. So let me go ahead and check and see. I may have chosen a code that was not valid in my database today. Sorry, that's always the likelihood. Oh, I did not map the first name. So I thought I had that there, but let's go ahead and go back to our template and double check that.
Just quickly, whilst you're doing that, Christine, we've just had one question, which is, will Input Acura find the spouse if they already exist on the database as a constituent?
Yes, it is set to map to that. So I think my file may not have had first names in it because I did map to that. So forgive me on that. But let me go ahead and show you the criteria sets because that's how it matches. And that's probably going to be more helpful for this conversation. So we have a few different options for our criteria sets. We have the individual constituent set, organization constituent set, individual relationship set, and the organization relationship set. So the reason I specify all of that is we're going to be working with this import with two different sets. That first individual constituent set is going to be looking at that primary constituent who already exists in Raiser's Edge. The second individual relationship set is going to be looking at the relationship that we're making with what's already in Raiser's Edge. So it's going to look at them on two different levels. The first level is if they're already a constituent, it will look for them and it will update them. If there's already a relationship, it's going to look at that second individual relationship set to find that relationship and make that happen. So it should look for them on both sides. The piece that I would definitely need to double check, though, is because the relationship is separate from the constituent. So say we have John and Judy Jones. John is in Raiser's Edge with a non-constituent relationship to Judy Jones, and Judy has a separate constituent record. You may still have a little bit of cleanup to make sure that she doesn't have two relationships with John after this is over. Because if we upgrade the one relationship, but then she already has a constituent record, it should match to her constituent record, but it may create a second relationship. Any other questions I can help with?
Just a couple of other ones. Somebody had asked about if they are promoting students from a non-constituent relationship to a full constituent when they graduate, they want to make sure that the relationship with the parent record will stay intact.
So yes, so that's what that setting that we have here, I'll just pull it back up. The area setting on the relationship, it will keep that relationship between the two. It's just going to convert it from being a non-constituent relationship to being a constituent relationship.
Okay, and then somebody was asking about whether or not we would be doing a training session for creating gift records. And I just wanted to point out that whilst that's not something we're going to cover in this training session, we do have recordings of that functionality on our website, and we offer group training as well if you're interested in learning how to create these templates for yourselves.
Yes, we do have, like Kimberly said, we have a two-part group training session that covers gifts, working with data transformations, and basic template building that we offer once a month. So if you're interested in more training, I'd be happy to send you information on that.
Okay, I think that's it for now.
All right, well, thank you all so much for joining us today. I'm going to go ahead and quit sharing my screen. Really appreciate you taking the time to learn more about how ImportAcular can help you convert your non-constituent relationships into constituent relationships in the Razor's Edge. I will be following up, like I said, with the recording, and you can ask me anything else at that point as well.
Thank you all. Have a beautiful afternoon.
Yes, Julie, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate you taking the time and sharing your expertise.
You're welcome. Thanks, everybody.